Hello and welcome to Identirati Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 137. A quick reminder to please follow the live stream on LinkedIn. Yesterday we were at 14,999, so we need one more to get to 1,500. Our guest today is Or Weis, co-founder and CEO of Permit.io. Welcome, Or.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again.
So some people might know that we had a quick change of episodes, and Or is nice enough to jump in on last minute. And are you on vacation, Or?
Not even close to it.
Okay.
I dream of vacations.
Yeah,
There's a little bit of vacation there.
I had one once. I heard it was really good, so I'm hoping to do it again. Anyway, it was really last minute when I got you, but I appreciate you coming on to chat about this. And it turns out that this is one of our we've had more impressions on this episode than almost any other episode in recent memory, because the topic is the acquisition of Styra by Apple, and I have two puns in the title, so it's iOPA. And Styra gets a Genius Bar makeover. I don't know what's going to happen to Styra, but maybe, or you're much more, much more about OPA than I do. Maybe just what are your thoughts initially?
Well, I think this is for the team behind Styra. I think this is a good outcome. It's something that enables them and the key people that have been working on OPA and the other open source capabilities around this project. By the way, amazing people that I'm had the good fortune of talking to and working with, and I'm really excited to see them taking this opportunity, landing in somewhere safe, where they can continue to work on this open source project and continue to improve it and continue to be people that kind of spearhead policy as code for us. So at least in terms of like the journey of Styra, I think this is a good outcome for now. I do think that it opens up a lot of questions of what's going to happen as the story continues to unfold. People are not going to stay in Apple forever. This project might not stay in the same alignment with Apple as this team gets readjusted and digested within Apple. And also this alignment of this project with the CNCF that might drift as time goes forward. And this opens up a lot of questions about OPA itself, policy as code in general, and what are going to be the best practices that we end up utilizing for policy as code. And this is actually happening in a dramatic moment in time, as the requirements for more fine-grained permissioning capabilities, for more policy management capabilities is growing as agentic AI is kind of reshuffling the deck across multiple stacks and environments.
Yeah, and I'll give my thoughts on this. Normally I just ask the questions, but today maybe I should take off the hat because I guess I'm going to engage in rampant speculation. So here we go. I'm officially a guest now. I'm out of host mode. And yeah, I think that it's a good outcome being bought by Apple. It's a very atypical outcome. Apple doesn't do a lot of acquisitions like this. We don't see Apple buying this company and that company in the identity security space. So I would say it is remarkable. And I hope it's a good outcome for the team. They couldn't have a better employer, right? Who's more exciting to work for than Apple right now? And it's always interesting to see as projects, get acquired and evolved, who stays and who moves on. And just because people move on doesn't mean they don't sometimes come back later. So that will be interesting. Yeah. OPA is a movement with 10 million downloads. I feel like the OPA community is really strong, not going anywhere. And that this sort of answers some questions about financial stability. Because I think everyone knew that they're also trying to commercialize where no one's really sure. It's not a public company, so you can't see how that's going. So there's going to be questions. And so I think this is a stable home, sort of like Cedar is for Amazon is for Cedar.
Mhm.
And so what I'd like to focus on is the what might Apple do with this, and sort of like rampant speculation, because I don't think even Apple knows that. So that's what I was hoping to have some fun with today. Um, but yeah, I think it's a good outcome for a company that came out of the cauldron of Silicon Valley, and had their own priorities. Um, and I know you have some thoughts about the business side of it. Maybe what this says about open source. I'm going to try not to get pulled into this one too deeply, but if you want to share some of your, what do you think it says to software companies in the open source area?
So yeah, we can try and do a little bit of all of these interesting topics. So we can talk about lessons that we have here from business building open source and alignment with it. And then I think we can go into what we think would happen within Apple. What is likely the goal with the team here and with the project, and what we're likely to see down the road. And there's already some hints that we can see, because, for example, the announcement, and also did a little bit more snooping around, but we know that they are going to release some more capabilities out of Styra that were completely commercial into the open source space. So there's more immediate results that we're going to see within the next couple of weeks, months. But let's start with, if you gave me the opportunity, I would love to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship and the lessons that I think we should learn here. We talked before. I took the stance that I think business has changed dramatically in the past 10, 20 years. The market is moving a lot faster, and doing open source today is not the same thing as doing open source 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Um, it's a lot easier to get yourself into a situation where you're cannibalized by your own open source, or where your competitors are taking advantage of you, um, or of through your open source offering. So I think the main lesson here is, when you're deciding to build on an open source strategy, you need to strike alignment in day one, and unless you get that, your end story is kind of set in stone from that moment on. And I think with Styra, they did experience challenges with that. And I personally really promote a concept that I call, instead of open core, open foundation. You build an open source offering that is a foundation for your commercial offering, but they're not the same. I've written quite extensively about this. You can find articles like "Rest in Peace Open Core" and "Long Live Open Source," and "Why Open Core is Dead," both published in the New Stack. And I think, in the end of the day, open source is going to remain a critical thing for businesses and for our ecosystem. But we need to learn how to build open source for the right moment in time, and the times are changing. So that's a little bit on that, and I think I'll stop with the business stuff. Going
Let's pause on the business stuff for a second. Let me just have a quick response to that, and then
Sure,
we'll
fair
move
enough.
past open source. Okay, so I think that, first of all, I would tell people that don't listen to Or and don't listen to Mike. Like, actually get your own evidence, and a good way to do that is to hear for a bit broad diversity of first person accounts from other founders. Now, Or has nailed it, so you really should listen to Or, believe me. But what you'll see as you listen to enough founders is that you will see some common themes emerging. But every business is different, and so it's important to understand, how's open source going to contribute and enhance and be a force multiplier for your business. Um, and it can be. And there are also some ways open source can go wrong, like every other business, like every other part of strategy. Um, Banks have figured out more ways to lose money than, I think any other industry. But in this case of OPA, I think what it's the lesson here is that adoption doesn't always mean monetization, but the really more subtle lesson is founders need to be really careful about protection of your trademark, and which trademark becomes important. So in this case, I think OPA itself is the really valuable trademark, and Styra is the less valuable trademark. Um, and so what happens is that anybody can make an OPA product, and they lose control over the quality of those products, and their product is competing with the other products. So I think that was a choice initially, um, and at the end of the day, you got to build a product that enough people want that they'll pay for, that you can build a business on. The business and the product are different, but I don't know. Docker obviously made this problem. Had this problem also. Everybody had a Docker product, but Docker couldn't monetize. Finally, they monetized the Windows version. So there is a lesson here. 10 million downloads is a lot. A lot of people will say, "Well, I'll get 10 million downloads and then I'll worry about it. I'll have lots of options." But it doesn't work out that way. And I think it's the part of like intellectual property that people forget about here is trademark. Um, and look at the difference between HashiCorp Vault and OPA, and you'll see that HashiCorp never lost control of their trademark, and now it's $1 billion public company. So I don't know.
So, definitely some great points there. I think the trademark is a key part of it, but I also think it's about where the value is, and I think it's really important to define clear values. What is the value prop for your commercial offering? What is the value prop for your open source offering? How people don't conflate those. And I think when you start to get to a point that, for example, the difference between your commercial offering and your open source offering, if the difference is, for example, performance, it makes it very hard to market, to say the least. But I think I kind of promised that we won't go too deep into these reads. So let's move on to.
I think it's okay, if we talk about the product. So they were commercializing, I guess, the DAS, this sort of some type of aggregation point, maybe or management point for a network of OPA agents or something.
There are two main offerings that Styra has been offering to the market. Styra DAS, which is their basically control plane for OPA. It still has a lot of capabilities around both managing OPA deployments, doing testing, doing CI/CD, doing policy authoring into OPA deployments, managing bundles. That's I'd say the main Styra offering that they pushed to the market. Another one that they added more recently is OPA Enterprise, which is essentially OPA with improved capabilities, primarily around performance and some data filtering capabilities. But it's essentially the same OPA, just with a little more on top. And I think a lot of people found that a little bit confusing. And what is the relationship between OPA Enterprise and the original OPA? With Styra DAS, they also had a competition with capabilities within OPA itself. So the bundle service within OPA, and also some friction from players like ourselves, like Permit. So we had Opal, which is essentially a open source alternative to DAS, and also capabilities within OPA itself, as I said, that were competing with Styra DAS as well.
I think it's something a little more fundamental than the products, though, because like companies don't know that they need to pay for something like DAS. They don't have a DAS now. They don't know, oh, when I build this thing, I need a DAS. So they're trying to convince customers that there's this new thing that they need to buy. And that seems sort of difficult. Maybe we're just boring here at Glue, but we know, people know they need to authenticate people in software, and that's a core infrastructure and capability. And we sell that, and they know that's expensive because, plumbing's expensive. But I think that wasn't one of the challenges, is that they're trying to sell this new thing that people don't actually know that they need. So they're having to create a whole new market.
I think there's some good reason in saying, okay, I'll provide people with some capability. It will take them on a significant journey. It will give them value, but I know that they'll end up in a point where they need additional help as part of that, and they'll discover new pain points as they're pursuing new goals with the offering. So you start using OPA, and it works great. But then when you want to take it to scale, when you want to manage it from an organizational perspective, then you discover that you need something like Styra DAS. Um, there might be something what you say that there's like educating the market is this is a it's still an emergent market, like policy is code in general, like unless you count Zacmo, it's a pretty young market, so most people are still not aware of this. People are still learning the best practices and standards.
Mhm.
And actually we're also learning, by the way, what I think one of the key things that I learned working with people with OPA and with policies code is that people don't care. People want to have all the best practices and promises of value that come with policy as code. They don't actually care what policy as code language they use. They don't actually care about how it's implemented. They don't actually care in a lot of cases on the minute aspects of how these engines work. They just want to be compatible with the standards, and they just want it to work. So um, so a lot of the minute aspects here of how you go about managing this, a lot of them are not top of mind for a lot of people. So to your point, yes, it's hard to kind of communicate this to the market, create the right messaging, create the right growth. Um, that being said, I do personally believe that these are uh, important practices, important values that we should adopt as a community, we should adopt as a society, maybe you should even say. And I think it's quickly becoming more and more important as our software continues to scale up, it continuing to becoming more complex and continuing to become more interconnected. Ironically, as I said before, we're at the junction point where a lot of the promised values of these are really coming to be manifested uh, as we speak now, because a lot of companies are shifting into new tech stacks that actually require these solutions now.
Do you think maybe OPA's approach was too open-ended for customers and not prescriptive enough? Like they had yes, you could deploy a network of OPA servers and write your policies and author them. And I think you're right. I saw this slide at a conference that really hurt, and it showed like the policy admins as this like very obscure group of people like off on the right side of the diagram. Um, and you're right. So most of the business doesn't even know that there are policy syntaxes, let alone which one they might prefer. Um, so do you think that maybe, but the approach was like too broad and not prescriptive enough? Um, um, and does that maybe you can relate that to your product? Your product seems like it's more prescriptive.
Yeah, our product permit is more prescriptive, as you say, but it's more.
Prescriptive, I think. Now even
Sorry.
I can't say it. um, and
Uh,
the word, let's use a different word also. So maybe so your product sort of gives you an idea of an approach. It
it's
has
more
a more
opinionated.
opinionated. Yeah, yeah. There we go.
Um, it's definitely more opinionated, but I think more importantly, it's more uh, uh, focused on the interfaces. So it's not just the engine itself, it's not just the technology that implements the policies, it's how people work with it. And as I said, I found that a lot of people want to use the power of Rego. Everyone wants to have policies code. No one wants to write in these languages. Very few people, even in the organizations that adopt OPA extensively, you end up having um, 3 to 5 people in total, maybe, like in huge organizations that actually understand these engines, actually understand these languages, and are able to professionally work with them directly. Most people will end up either using templates, either using code written by these people, or using wrapping interfaces. So this is why with permanent.
Let me disagree with you there.
Okay.
Um, I would say the most likely way people will write policy is like through Claude or ChatGPT, and
That's
or
an
through some
interesting one.
prompt led. Where this is how I did it in my last project or my last spec. I was like, generate these policies, and it was sort of an iterative process where I'm like, no, that's not even like a word you can use, and and so it hallucinated a lot. But eventually, we got 47 versions later, we got to a version that actually could be validated. Um, so I think that, in my opinion, that's the main way we're going to see policies written, is there'll be a lot of them, and they'll be mostly generated through the prompt.
I think even for being able to work with an agent on policies code, you need to
Mhm.
understand the policy language. You need to understand how the engine works. For a lot of developers, the fact that this is a logical programming language, meaning the engine runs through the statements recursively for you and doesn't go function by function uh, um, as they call one another, is very confusing and very hard for a lot of developers to start with, let alone the non-technical people on the team. And you have a lot of those. Your compliance and security people, you have your support, you have your professional services, your architects. A lot of people are involved in policy and in permissioning uh, across the company. At the end of the day, when you're building something, you need to connect other people and systems to what you've built. So every different role in the company touches on permissioning and policy to some degree, and most of them don't have the skill set, even with the assistance of AI, to be able to author these correctly. I definitely think that AI would extend the ability of more professional engineers to work on policies code, but I don't think it would become the main way that most of the organization does. Most of the organization would still utilize more simplified interfaces, and that's part of what we try to offer with Cedar. And I do think that even for those, like for example, we provide the ability to author policies that when end up generating Rego, we allow you to offer that with Terraform. So I definitely can see people writing Terraform, or maybe calling our API or our SDKs like Claude or ChatGPT, etc., Cursor. Um, and that's extending that. And so every layer that you go up, and like with our UI, and I can also people have ChatGPT explain to them how to utilize the UI or even drive the UI for them, and definitely use like our MCP server to author policies. But so for every layer you get more and more capabilities, but for every layer you need the right interfaces. And for most of those layers, people don't need and don't want to understand policy as code directly. Just like a lot of people don't understand how TCP/IP works, or how you do how databases actually save your data. Those are important skill sets, and we need people to be able to work with them, and we need the standards across that stack. But it's probably not for everyone.
I don't know that developers are going to be able to completely get out of the business of not caring about policies, though. One way or another, they're going to write them. I actually want to pivot a little bit to drill down into the device, because Apple's a consumer company. They're not selling you, of course, back-ended by a lot of SaaS services, and infrastructure like iCloud Keychain, for example. Um, but I think what's interesting about the OPA acquisition is I don't buy the story that they bought them just because they're nice. I don't think Apple's ever done an altruistic thing in its corporate history. They bought them because it's going to give them some competitive advantage or enable them to develop some new technology or some great consumer products and make them the best consumer electronics globally integrated company of all time. I mean, so I kind of want to spend, and in looking at through the Apple lens, it's hard not to focus on the iPhone and wonder about OPA being embedded into an iPhone. And I posited this on my on the LinkedIn blog or the LinkedIn post and said, "I governor." Um, so basically, like a module um, that. Um, so there's
Oh,
a
you
number
also
of.
did the reference to Murderbot there, right?
Exactly. So right, and this is I was going to say. So all conversations with Mike lead back to Murderbot recently, um, But
So
right, so Apple TV has a show called Murderbot, based on a novel by Wells, I think, and a short story. And in this story, the bot has this thing called the governor module, and he actually hacks it, like he hacks it out of his body. So he's the original hacker. And so after he hacks the governor module out, he can no longer be controlled. He's autonomous, but he still has to send back data. Otherwise, they'll say this guy's gone rogue. So he's pretending to be governed, but he's not. He's really autonomous. Um, and I wonder. And then I see Apple acquire Styra, and I immediately go there and be like, okay, they want to install this type of like conscience almost that runs and has policies. Especially the policies could get really complicated in the ML area. So the device might have some machine learning capabilities on the device, like the ability to recognize people. And so those ML models have access to a lot of sensors, the camera, the microphone, etc. And so maybe the governor module, iGovernor, could sort of govern which sensors, which models have access to with regard to, maybe what applications are using them. So you could see how this gets pretty deep. But what are your thoughts? I know you guys have a client-side product also that runs really lightweight. What are your thoughts on possibly the PDP moving into the mobile app?
So I'll start with what I think is actually going on, and then I'll talk on this because I think it's also there's like I think you're making good points, and some of this is relevant as well. But I think like using Occam's razor, I think that the most likely goal for Apple with the Styra team and with OPA is to support their internal use for their own servers and applications. They've been doing so. They've been using OPA extensively for a while. I also know we talked to them. They considered using Permit at one point there as well. And policy as code is something that Apple has adopted very favorably, and they've been using it internally for quite a while now. So I think it's most likely that they are saying, hey, we want to keep this thing going. We want to have the best of breed of it as we're continuing to build internally. And
That's a very boring theory.
With Occam's razor, usually you get the simple, less exciting, most likely answers to things.
That's a very expensive product acquisition.
First, I think from Apple's perspective, for something that is important for them, it's well, obviously we don't know what the exact financials here were, but I think even in extreme conditions that you look at this type of deal, it's probably not something that would get Apple's budget people too worried. They're a very
being
large
American and prone to conspiracy theory, I'm completely discounting that very likely like option one, and want to immediately go to the much more unlikely realm.
So let's go there. I do think that we'll be seeing, I think, first of all, PDP today and OPA today, and also Cedar and the Cedarling project are already enabling us to embed policy into more layers across the stack. And I think that we'll be seeing two things happen as we move into agentic AI. We'll be seeing more gateway use. So we're seeing MCP gateways arise. We're seeing more A2A gateways arise. So there will be more kind of control plane capabilities that will manage how these different components interconnect. And at the same time, a lot of the decision making will need to propagate down the stack to the database level, to the API level, to the edge level for things like IoT devices, robotics, applications running on edge devices, etc.
So you are agreeing with me then.
I am agreeing with you, but I want to separate two things here. Why this acquisition happened and how this leads into the future. are, in my mind, somewhere parallel than directly interconnected. But I do think they will feed into one another. I think Apple, having this capability would encourage them to implement more of this across their stack. And that obviously means also into the edge devices that they have. And they're obviously leaders in edge devices. By the way, they've already, and I have some intimate knowledge of this as well, because my co-founder, his thesis is actually being used by Apple. So they're using techniques for secure multi-party computation to be able to do checks for um, problematic data, like for primarily things like illegal information, pedophilia, stuff like that. So they're able to identify that information on devices without having visibility into that information directly themselves. That solved a lot of problems for Apple, from the law enforcement requirements that were forced on them and the privacy requirements that they wanted to continue to adhere to. There were a lot of cases where the FBI came to Apple and required them to unlock devices or get them access to remote devices, etc. And Apple didn't want to be in that situation, like Google and a lot of other big companies. It's a really problematic legal, privacy, moral situation to be at.
Yeah, they're in
So,
some tricky situations. Let me ask a technical question.
okay.
I don't know OPA that well. Do you think OPA will run on an iPhone? And do you think they might want to run a version of OPA on the iPhone?
I think you can definitely run OPA on an iPhone. At the end of the day, it's a Go application. You can compile it. It also supports. You can run Rego and subsets of OPA as WebAssembly, so you
Mhm.
can technically run it anywhere. Um, is it the easiest thing to do with the current tool chain or tool set that exists? I wouldn't necessarily say so. But I can easily see like a project that is dedicated to it, bringing in into the ecosystem and making it more available, like in Swift or in um, pre-packaged iOS uh,
Mhm.
binaries. Um, that being said, I think there are other options to choose from, like Cedar, Cedarling, and other more lightweight and maybe more opinionated projects that you can use for edge devices.
Mm.
And I
Wait,
think we'll,
that's interesting. So you're saying technically, yeah, they could probably do it, although maybe it's not there today. Um, and it might not be the best optimized for that particular application. Like Cedar might be better for that. Um, and do you think Apple would care at the end of the day? They're not going to care because they own OPA or because OPA is part of their team. Do you think OPA would get priority over another technology, or Apple would be like, well, we're just going to choose whatever is better. This is our flagship product.
I can try and answer this question. I will maybe preface it or add a disclaimer here that I have no actual idea.
No,
We're talking to my Chat
we're
GPT.
speculating.
Yeah, I'm speculating, exactly. I think in the end of the day, it will boil down to internal politics. Most likely, it's going to be a different team within Apple that is responsible for this. So they'll probably be encouraged to work with the OPA folks, but probably not mandated to. And and they'll end up deciding primarily on what's best for them, what will work more easily for them.
Let
Um,
me just make a quick point. I want to compare it to Amazon. Amazon said because it's an Cedar's an Amazon product, sometimes it makes it harder because their colleagues are like, "Oh, you're just pushing this on me because it's an AWS product." So who knows? It might even make it harder for OPA. You never know it could go the other direction. So
it could go. I think policy is code, and policy engines have more evolving to do with
mhm.
the with agentic AI primarily. Like, by the way, when you're saying, will you use policy engines for enforcement at the edge? There's a lot of question marks still in that in that question, a lot of fog of war. Like, what type of policies, for what purposes, what volumes of data are you going to be addressing here? And there's a big difference between, oh, I'm just going to do some checks against the file system, or general pattern matching, and something like, oh, I want to manage agentic AI and I want to trace relationships. Both OPA and Cedar have some support for reback, but both of them are not really seeing reback, relationship-based access control, as a first-class citizen. You'd find projects like OpenFGA and SpiceDB and Permit more oriented on that. Like, the main thing to it, one of the, not the main thing, but one of the key things that we did with Permit is taking OPA, taking policy as graph, and combining the two so you can get the benefits of both worlds. And maybe we'll be seeing OPA as the requirement for more relationship-driven conversations or policy, and we're seeing that clearly with AI. Like, when you have a chain of access, an AI is talking to an AI talking to an AI, and you have some human down the chain, being able to trace these chains is very AI native, and it will be very apparent in most policies related. So we might be seeing these engines embrace that, evolve that. We might be seeing an amalgam like we do with Permit, where we combining uh, uh, graph databases capabilities with OPA. We might see that kind of emerge as a pattern. So when you were saying, will this be used by Apple for enforcement at the edge? It also depends for what purposes. I think that will also change the space, and I think that will connect very drastically to how Apple continues to think about primarily privacy, data, and AI use. Those are, I think, would be the main drivers where they'll be required to apply policy in general and at the edge.
Um, I just want to riff for a second on identity versus capabilities based access control. Um, it seems like, our old hierarchical model of identity based access control, it's kind of army like, know who's in charge, know who's to blame. This isn't scaling well to the complexity of the policies that you were describing about, for example, should I share this data with the authorities? Like, there's no role-based solution for that. Um, and so our security policies have to get more complex. And I've been advocating to move us away from an identity-centric access control model towards a capabilities-based access control model. Your thoughts on that, on like culturally where we are, if that needs to happen, or what other solutions we should consider?
Yeah, I think with human identities, I think the identity aspect has been and will continue to be very strong and apparent, and a leading component for us. So I don't think we'll be seeing drift there so much into capabilities driven or intent driven policies, both because we're used to it and because, in the end of the day, human identities are easier. We have our fixed bodies, our biometrics, we have government assigned certificates. It's easy, rather easy for most of us to retain secrets and use them. So I think that will remain um, somewhat the same, but it's going to become less important. Human identities are going to become much less important, both because uh, agentic identities are going to outnumber us dramatically. It's very easy to see if I have more than two agents serving me, and so does everyone else. There's more agentic identities than human ones. But maybe more interestingly, our culture of how we're using software is changing. Everything is becoming vibe first. So we have vibe coding. Soon we'll have vibe shopping, vibe investing, vibe real estate, vibing. Who knows? And so that means that the main identities working and changing things would be agentic ones. I'll be talking to my agents like I'm doing. So today, when I'm writing code, I'm not writing code. I'm talking to an agent who's actually writing the code, right? So that's going to be, I'm not going to do shopping. I'm going to tell an agent to go shopping for me, and I'll pick and choose from what they gather from me. So this is going to be the way for most things. That's the kind of the promised future that has been promised for us from like days gone by. So when we're in that future, agentic identities are the main identities by all factors and measures. So, and for them,
And these agents might be running on the phone, right?
they'll be in. So you'll have baby agents embedded into tiny things like your. Think about it. Like if you use a tool like Clay, you have cells that are mini agents. If you're using Excel now, you have Copilot embedded into a cell. So these are, you have mini agents baked into every little thing. You have big agents driving the.
I'm getting at the phone because the phone could potentially be disconnected. And so we might have an agent that's sort of acting on my behalf that gets disconnected from the network. And I wanted to sort of spin this into today, the phones have verifiable credentials. They can interact with the human and get a like a driver's license or something from the wallet. And also tokens themselves have a sort of permanence. Like if I have a token, I don't need to be connected from the network to trust it. There's like smart cards in the old days. Smart cards don't require any connection. It's a token. It's signed. I can trust the data that it asserts. So the interesting thing for me is now if this policy engine is running on the phone and the phone gets disconnected, then a number of these agents running on the phone will need governance, right?
So I think that's maybe the first point. You're not going to have one agent on your phone. You're going to have many agents on your phone. And I think it's very important that we avoid like some of the clear pitfalls here. So for example, one of the main naive approach that I'm saying is think of the agent as an extension of yourself. That's to some degree right and true, but you shouldn't think of it as an extension of yourself when you're talking about credentials. You shouldn't give your credentials as a service to the agent directly because it's not you. It doesn't have your volition. It doesn't have your accountability. It doesn't have your.
Yeah. Can I suggest a metaphor here? So my wife's working on a podcast. It's about end of life autonomy. It's called Dolores and Howard Kick the Bucket. And in that community, they talk about things called an advanced directive. So, and you might have multiple advanced directives. You might have one for medical. You might have one for financial. You might have one that, this is the person who's good at tech, who's going to shut down all my social media after I die, right? Now, those advanced directives are good, even if you're dead. And don't we need something like this for when you talk about this agent is an agent of me, that's giving it an awful lot of like my identity projecting onto this piece of software. I don't see it as a dual persona. It's a freaking piece of software, right? And I've given it an advanced directive to do something, full stop.
Yeah. So so that's one of the clear pitfalls. Your agent is not you, and you shouldn't give it your credentials directly, and you shouldn't let it have the opportunity to go rogue. I'm really advocating for
no murder bot.
For example, in that case, it kind of ended. It's a sweet story in the end of the day, and and I trust him.
He's the murder prevention bot. He is not murder bot at all. He's actually safety bot, but there could be a little bit of murder involved in preventing murder.
He's thinking about murder, but at the end of the day, in his heart, it is policy of policies. He cares about people, and he's maybe more trustworthy than a lot of other real humans that I know.
Yeah, anyway, it's a good story. I highly recommend. I tell everyone to watch it. It's fun. Yeah.
Likewise, my wife and I had a blast watching it. Can't wait for season 2. Hope maybe Apple will plug in some policy as code as part of the next season. But the point I was going for was advocating for zero standing permissions for AI agents. They should derive their permissions from the human. So if the human is not alive anymore, or maybe it just decided that the agent shouldn't have access anymore, that should be enforced immediately and on the fly. And actually fine-grained policy engines like OPA are perfect for that. So I definitely think we should be using tokens here. We definitely should have a token that should represent the identity of the agent and allow us to audit it and have it reutilize the relationships that we've gathered
Yeah.
for it, but we shouldn't have that token give it all the permissions for a long standing period of time, because that's, again, he's not you, and he shouldn't be using your credentials directly. And I think there's going back to maybe the your original questions, talking about capability based. I am capability based as opposed to identity based. I think with agentic AI, both capability based and intent based are the only things that we can actually rely on here. And here I've been using this talking point a lot, but it's a good one. And I like to reference the ship of Theseus thought experiment. So the ship of Theseus, going back to ancient Greece, imagine you have a boat, a ship. It's comprised of wooden planks and nails, and you gradually go about testing every nail and every plank till none of them remained. Is it still the same ship? This is essentially the problem that we have with AI. It can change its model, it can change its where it's running, it can change its framework, it can change the underlying coding capabilities that it has. It can change everything. Is it still the same AI agent? How do we point at it and say, even in our audit logs, this is the same agent throughout time doing different tasks? Um, and so, what I think is important here is that if we think about the where the ship is sailing, what is the intent of the ship, what is the intent of the agent, that's the only thing that we can actually persist through time. And so being able to look at AI agents and deduce their intent and use that for their identity, that's something that could actually work, as opposed to I don't know, I actually don't know what are the alternatives, just giving it human identities or machine identities and praying.
Yeah, I think everyone's on the same page there. Nobody knows what those tokens are or under what flows they're achieved or how we trust them or how we make policies about them. All that's undefined, but I think the path forward is clear. Um, and there's a couple of episodes coming up where we discuss stuff like this. We have a one coming up soon about a new OpenID standard for agentic AI, some engineers from WSO2. Next week, I'm putting my hat back on. We're going to talk about, with Relock, a new company doing silent authentication. Should be fun. Please join us on Tuesday. Thank you so much for engaging in this very last minute episode and speculating about stuff that we can only guess about, but still had fun guessing about. So, or thank you so much. Great having you.
Thanks for having me, and I hope it was an interesting conversation for people watching. And if anyone has questions on OPA, agentic AI, how to survive the transition from Styra, please feel free to shout out to me or at Permit.io, and you can also find me on LinkedIn and in our Slack community as well.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, Or. Thanks, audience. See you next time.